So today, we're not actually going to focus on the infamous Tuskegee study itself. Instead, we're diving into something that's just as crucial: the official 1973 government report that investigated and judged the whole thing. This is really the story of how a nation had to reckon with its own staggering failure, and what that whole process can teach us, even now.
Okay, so this right here is our main source, the final report of the Tuskegee Syphilis Study Ad Hoc Advisory Panel. But this is so much more than just a document. It represents that official, undeniable moment the U.S. government was forced to look in the mirror and confront a 40-year ethical catastrophe that happened on its own watch.
And that really gets to the heart of what we're talking about, right? How does a country, or really any big institution, truly investigate its own mistakes? This wasn't just about pointing fingers. It was about figuring out a way to get to the truth and create some accountability. And that was a mission the advisory panel pretty much had to invent as they went.
All right, so we're going to walk through their work in the same way they did. We'll start with their mandate for truth, then we'll look at how they judged the past, what they planned for the survivors, their vision for protecting the future, and finally, the incredible legacy this one report left behind. So who even was this panel, and what were they supposed to do? Well, after the Tuskegee story was exposed to the public in 1972, the pressure was just immense. The government had to do something, and that something was forming this ad hoc advisory panel. Ad hoc, just means it was created for this one specific, very urgent purpose.
So this charter set up a 9-member panel, but the composition, that was the really critical first move. They deliberately brought in people from all different fields. This was to make sure it wasn't just going to be doctors judging other doctors. You had experts in medicine, sure, but also in law, religion, labor, and public affairs. They knew that a purely medical view could never capture the full scope of what went wrong.
Their mission was broken down into 3 crystal-clear charges. First, look back. Was the study ever okay, especially after they found a cure? Second, deal with the present. Should we stop this thing right now, and what do we owe the men who are still alive? And third, protect the future. Are our rules for human research actually good enough to stop this from ever happening again? Past, present, and future. I mean, it was a total reckoning.
All right, so the panel's first task was probably its heaviest. They had to look back over 40 years of this research and deliver a judgment, not just on the science, but on the morality of the whole thing. And their verdict, taken right out of the report, was just absolutely damning. No soft pedaling, no excuses. Ethically unjustified. Not just in hindsight, not just after penicillin showed up, but from the day it started in 1932. This wasn't a study that went off the rails. It was wrong from the start.
Then, the panel just took the official story and dismantled it piece by piece. The myth was that this was a pure scientific study of untreated syphilis. The reality? The report found many of the men had gotten some kind of treatment over the years. The myth was that the science was solid for its time. The reality? The study didn't even have a formal written protocol, like the most basic requirement for any real research. And the biggest one? The myth of consent was completely shattered. The panel found no evidence that informed consent was gained from the human participants. And this timeline, it just reveals the most agonizing part of the whole story. It started in 32. By the late 40s, penicillin was out there, a known cure, but the study kept going. The panel even pinpointed 1953 as the absolute latest date by which treatment should have been offered to every single person. Instead, it went on for almost 2 more decades.
But even with that strong condemnation, it wasn't enough for everyone on the panel. One member, a Dr. J. Katz, who was a professor of law and psychiatry at Yale, he actually wrote a separate addendum. He felt the main report, as harsh as it was, didn't quite get to the deepest moral failure.
Dr. Katz wrote this incredibly powerful line, and it's just echoed through the decades since. They were treated not as human subjects, but as objects of research. For him, arguing about treatment timelines or scientific protocols was missing the point. The fundamental sin was dehumanization. The men were never seen as people, as partners in research. They were just raw material for data.
So, with the past judged, the panel turned to its second charge, the immediate crisis. What needed to be done for the living survivors and their families, the ones who had been so deeply, profoundly wronged?
Their very first recommendation was completely unequivocal. Not pause the study, not review it some more, terminate it, immediately.
The harm that was still happening had to stop, and it had to stop right now. And from there, they laid out a really concrete plan for what to do next. First, create a whole new medical group with no ties to the original study to oversee all the care. Second, finally tell the men the complete truth about the study they had been in for decades. Third, provide immediate, comprehensive medical care for everything, syphilis and any other health issues. And finally, make damn sure that any of those so-called benefits they were promised, like burial insurance, were actually honored.
Now, this is where the report's impact just explodes way beyond Tuskegee. The panel's third charge was to look at the whole system of human research in America and ask that huge question: how do we make sure nothing like this can ever happen again?
And what they found, well, the system was just riddled with flaws. There was no single uniform federal policy. The job of regulation was basically left to the researchers themselves. The rules around informed consent were vague, full of loopholes. There were no real consequences for breaking them, and there was absolutely no system for helping people who were harmed by research.
So the panel's solution was, for its time, pretty revolutionary: create a permanent, independent National Human Investigation Board. Its only job would be to set and enforce ethical rules for all federally funded human research. This was a radical idea: to take ethical oversight out of the hands of the researchers and put it into an independent body.
So what's the ultimate legacy of this report, now 50 years later? It's easy to just see it as the final page of a tragedy, but it was so much more than that.
The report really has this powerful dual legacy. On one hand, it finally ended the Tuskegee study and got long overdue care to the survivors. But on the other hand, its deep dive into all the systemic failures laid the very foundation for the modern system of ethical protections we have now, including the institutional review boards, or IRBs, that have to approve and watch over all human research. It was an ending for sure, but it was also a beginning.
And that leaves us with a final question, doesn't it? This report was a response to one specific, horrific event, but the ethical questions it brings up are timeless. It's a permanent reminder that good intentions are never enough, and that without rigorous, independent oversight, science can completely lose its way. The challenge it leaves for us is to make sure that its hard-won lessons stay front and center in all scientific research. Always.